Hello, everybody. I am Bill Murphy Jr. This is understandably.com, and we have a fun interview, a smart interview today. I'm pretty excited about this one. This is Judi Henderson, who has started and grown just a business that I found pretty interesting and unusual called Mannequin Madness. And welcome, Judi. Thanks for taking some time to talk with me.
Thanks for giving me a chance to tell my story.
Awesome. So somebody mentioned this story as a woman who started a company based on a Craigslist ad 20 years ago, or a little bit more than 20 years ago, I think. So
Yes.
do you want to just tell me how that all started and a little bit about your background and what your business is?
Sure. Prior to starting the business, I was working at a .com startup. And that was when everybody thought that they could be an entrepreneur. It was the first time I was ever exposed to what a serial entrepreneur was. And I just read two books that really impressed me. One was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and the other one was The Artist Way. Almost two completely different streams of thought. But they made me realize I wanted to do something creative, and I wanted to have possibly a side hustle. At the time, I was too risk averse to think about doing a full-time business. So I had something in mind, but nothing specific. I was looking on Craigslist, believe it or not, for Tina Turner concert tickets, and I noticed a guy was selling a mannequin. Now, most people would probably just pass over that, but I always wanted a mannequin to decorate with mosaic tiles and put in my backyard. That's how it started. I went to go see the seller, and it turned out he didn't have just one or two mannequins for sale, but 50 mannequins for sale. He ran the only mannequin rental business in town and was leaving the state. Now, even though, Bill, I had never touched a mannequin before, I had never worked retail, and I had never started a business. Something just, have those kind of crazy aha moments. I said, you know what? I'm going to buy his inventory and do this purely as a side hustle. That's how it started.
Okay. And so you said in town. Where were you then? Maybe it's the same
San Francisco Bay Area.
Yes. Then and now still, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Great. And so you must have had just the mere fact that you said you wanted to put mosaic tiles on a mannequin and put them in your backyard tells me something about you. So what you said you were at a .com startup. What was your profession? What was your vocation? What was your avocation if it wasn't?
Yeah, I'd always been in sales and marketing, ironically, mainly with Fortune 500 companies, very conservative, traditional companies that really paid well, but crushed my creativity. And then when I went to go work at the .com startup, it was a much more freewheeling kind of environment and just changed my whole perspective. And I thought maybe it is possible to combine something that's creative and fun and make a business out of it. But same thing, I really just thought it was going to be a side hustle way to get some additional revenue. The book Rich Dad Poor Dad is all about having multiple revenue streams, which has always been a driving factor for me.
Got it. And I don't know if you want to say what the .com startup was. I'm curious whether it still exists.
Oh no, it went under, and that's what happened. I was doing it just part-time, but mannequin business, and then when 9/11 happened, the .com startup folded. It was back in the days where everybody had a .com and many of them didn't last. This was one of those. I don't even remember the name of it myself right now. It was one of those offbeat kind of things. But it gave me a lot of experience, considering that at the time I was in my 40s, which is old for technology, particularly in the Bay Area. And it gave me a lot of exposure to technology, which I was able to apply to a very low-tech business called Mannequins.
Yeah. Okay. So so tell me how the business works.
So when I first started, I was just renting mannequins. And then what happened is I realized that department stores would routinely throw mannequins in the trash if they were closing or remodeling, or they were just no longer popular, even though they were still in great condition. I knew from my own experience there was a need for there was a secondary need for mannequins. So I started convincing them to let me recycle, which really upcycle their mannequins for them. I would save them on waste disposal fees because I would come and pick up their mannequins for free. They didn't have to pay waste disposal fees, and it became an eco-friendly way to get rid of their mannequins. This was long before sustainable commerce became the buzzword that it is now. But I went from 50 mannequins to 500 mannequins in a 6-month period of time. So then I could go from just renting to selling. First selling locally, because e-commerce was still far away. Only thing you could do at that time was maybe sell on eBay. I didn't have an e-commerce website at the time. And then just expanded. As the technology expanded, so did my business. So then I could start selling nationally and internationally. So now then I started adding new mannequins, because when I was only selling used mannequins, when the inventory was gone, it was gone. So I work now with drop shippers in order to bring in some new inventory as well.
I see. Now, I know nothing about mannequins. I've probably thought more about mannequins in just the short time of preparation for this discussion than I ever did. But so are mannequins something that there are millions or thousands of manufacturers all around the world, or is it like zippers where there's only a few only a limited number of actual manufacturers.
Yeah, well, definitely the industry has gotten smaller over time as as the rise of online has come on. And there's less need for manufacturers. There's been a lot of consolidation in the industry, and most of them are manufactured in China. But there's still a fair amount of them, and there's different price points for different mannequins too. There's some mannequins that are collector's series, sort of like buying an old Porsche. Then there are other ones that are like an inexpensive car, just something just kind of gets the job done, but it's not going to really last you very long.
Yeah. What's the surprising thing about mannequins that people would not suspect unless they were?
I'm surprised at all the artistic reasons that people use a mannequin, not just for Halloween or Burning Man, but I have a Pinterest board with over 50,000 followers. And it's amazing to me the creative ways that people use mannequins or mannequin parts to create something artistic, some way of personal expression. Sometimes it's used as a decoy. Sometimes people just buy a mannequin as a decoy to pretend like somebody's in the building or someone's in their car. But a lot of times it's just creative purposes. I've seen people make furniture, lamps, mailboxes out of mannequins. I think we're fascinated with the human form.
I see. And so is that a big portion of your customer base as opposed to companies or small? I don't know. I'm thinking of.
It's really kind of 50-50. I do a fair amount with retails, and usually I'm dealing with the smaller retailers, someone who's opening up a pop-up store, has a small chain, or someone who's selling online and doesn't really have a brick and mortar. I don't have the inventory to supply Macy's with all of their mannequins, for example, even though they may buy selected items from me. But I get a lot more of like retail, and then a lot of the people who are, like I said, want it for more like an artistic, fun kind of purpose, like me, wanted to mosaic and put in their backyard.
Yeah.
And that's where I sell a lot of my used mannequins to, where the new mannequins are usually people who have a store.
I see. Okay. So what are your distribution channels then?
So pretty much everybody buys directly on my website, but I
yeah.
have 5 drop shippers that I work with, so I can have a very wide range of inventory. And then my used inventory changes all the time, depending on what store I'm working with. Sometimes, I've worked with almost every major national retailer, from Nike to Giorgio Armani to Macy's to Nordstrom, and each of them have different styles of mannequins. Even I was surprised at the whole range of mannequins. J.C. Penney is going to have a different style mannequin than, say, a high-end luxury store. And mannequins is an umbrella term for all things. That includes mannequin hands, mannequin legs, mannequin heads for displaying hats. Every sort of body part is under the umbrella of mannequins.
Ah, okay. Yeah, you must see mannequins in your sleep, I would think.
They're like giant Barbie dolls to me. I kind of got used to it now.
Yeah.
The same issues apply in running this business. People think because, I'm dealing with mannequins that I don't have the same business issues, but the same thing, whether it's, cash flow issues, employees, we had to shut down several months during the COVID because we're considered a non-essential business. So some of the same issues are the same, but I do have an advantage in terms of my product is something that's fun. People who come in to see me, they're using their imagination, whether it's for a business purpose or for some personal need. And so it's really great when you're around people who just feel excited and fulfilled. They're surprised to find, there's a mannequin company right here. Because a lot of people come into our store as well. We sell online in our store.
Yeah, so I'm looking behind you. I see mannequins. I didn't know if this was if it's a publicly accessible store or if it's
so. Yeah, we're open 3 days a week to the public.
Where are you located?
We're in Oakland, California.
You're in Oakland, okay. And so, interesting. Now, so I read somewhere you talked about the guy that originally sold you the mannequin said, "I will also give you my customer list," but didn't follow through, if I remember.
Correct.
So I'm always interested in, I think it's Reid Hoffman talks about doing things that don't scale to begin with. And I'm always interested in that sort of thing. So what do you do? Now I'm sitting with 50 mannequins and no customers. What do you do?
50 mannequins, no customers, no prior experience. And this was really internet. It was definitely pre-social media. Yeah, and I had also missed the deadline to advertise in the Yellow Pages, those of us who are old enough to know what the Yellow Pages were. So I was like, wow, what do you do? And you just have to use the old-fashioned way, which was just go and have personal contact with people. I think we've kind of lost the art of doing that. I went to every department store in the area and introduced myself to the visual merchandising department because I knew people would call Macy's or Nordstrom if they wanted to rent a mannequin. They don't rent mannequins. So they were happy to be able to refer customers to me. So they became really my word of mouth at that particular point. And that's how
was your first step a phone call back then? Was it an email? Was it physically showing up and saying hi?
It was a phone call. It was a phone call so that I could make an appointment to introduce myself.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
And leaving my business card. Nowadays we're just so used to just sending somebody an email or a DM or something like that. But there was something about a personal touch, and particularly they were always fascinated about why I started the business since I was not in the industry. Most people who are in the visual merchandising industry have a a personal passion toward mannequins. And they was excited that I was excited about them too, that I saw them as an art piece, not just a commodity to come and go. And
Yeah.
that's how I first learned about that they were throwing mannequins in the trash. A visual merchandiser said, hey, our chain is remodeling to get rid of all of their mannequins. They're too nice to just throw in the trash. Would you be interested? That's how I heard about it.
Wow. Okay. Okay. And so tell me about, you said you went from 50 to 500 in 6 months. So that, I mean, I know we're talking 20 years ago now, but I'm just thinking of the challenges that would entail. Physically, what do you do with 500 mannequins if you don't
And
have a
can you
warehouse?
believe I was still working for my home bill? So first
Okay.
of all, we converted the basement to our mannequin warehouse.
Okay.
Then all our garage stalls became a mannequin warehouse. And
Okay.
then the backyard had tents where the mannequins were underneath there. And
Wow.
that is part of the reason why I called it Mannequin Madness. First of all, people thought I was crazy for doing this from the very beginning. But many times when you would see our backyard, it
Yeah.
definitely did look like Mannequin Madness. And for the longest, we just did business out of our backyard as an appointment only basis because it's sort of a niche kind of a business. It wasn't like someone needed to come by, Monday through Friday, anytime. They were happy to be able to come in on the weekend or something like that.
Mhm.
But for the long, after a while, we got, what do we say? Someone from the city told us that we could no longer have mannequins in our backyard. We had these huge coffin-sized boxes because we got some mannequins from Nike, and they were coming down of our driveway. They were like stacked 6 feet high, and they're probably about 6 feet wide. And even though I had a business permit to be able to work out of my home, not to carry that amount of inventory in my backyard, it became, I guess they said, a fire hazard. So I
I
was
was going to
forced
ask
to
you
move.
exactly that question because depending on where you can live, and I mean, I lived in LA for a while, never lived the Bay Area, but I always thought California, especially, you know, rural Arkansas or something, maybe you get away with it, but I don't know about Oakland.
Yeah, I had a mix. I was in a mixed use neighborhood, so it
Uh-huh.
allowed to some degree, but not to have that kind of inventory. And that's probably, I needed that push. Just like the
Yeah.
9/11 push forced me to decide if I wanted to do the mannequin business full time. The push to move out of our backyard took us to a whole other level. I think because I didn't know anybody who ran a business who looked like me or was in my age group, let alone the type of business. In the
Mhm.
Bay Area, an entrepreneur is usually always a 30 something ish white male in the technology field. So it
Yeah.
took me a long time to even think that I'm running a business. I just still always thought it was like a little hobby. But I
Yeah.
was forced to move out. It changed my mindset about how I saw myself and how I ran my business.
Yeah. I mean, actually, do you want to talk a little bit about that? I know it's before even the business here, but you talked about being in .com, being in sales and everything. I mean, even then, I still think of like, all, a, a team of like 10 guys and 8 of them would be 20 something white men. How did you, like, why were you the exception? How did, like, what was it that, how did the stars align for you and whatnot?
Well, I'm pretty tenacious, and I think they could see that about me for
Mhm.
starters, and that I always did have a youthful spirit and a zest for learning. So that helped. And then many times it was helpful for me because I saw these guys aren't any smarter than I am, but they just have so much more confidence because they had so much more experience. And
Yeah.
that's one reason I like to share my story because I know representation matters.
Mhm.
If I had seen more people who looked like me, I might have thought I was an entrepreneur sooner. This was long before girl boss became a term. I mean, I was
Yeah.
really an OG, as they say, one of the initial founders. But I really liked what I was doing. It just so happened that I was making money at it too. But my purely motivation was I liked it. And also, I was really concerned from an environmental standpoint.
Yeah.
Mannequins are made out of materials that do not biodegrade. So
Mhm.
they should not be put in landfills. And since landfills are often in communities where people of color live, and as a person of color, that really concerned me. So it's sort of like I saw a problem that became a personal passion that allowed me to make a profit.
Got it. So if you think now, we're only going to talk for a certain amount of time here, and we probably can't cover every up and down of the business over that. But if you were to think over, I guess it was that first Craigslist. Actually, I got to fix the camera here a little bit. You're a little bit off.
Okay.
There we go. That's better. Yeah. Anyway, but like we couldn't do 20 years of ups and downs. But were there big inflection points? If that's the word, like big challenges or big moments when you said, "Oh, like, we've just brought the whole business to the next level." Like if you think back over the 20+ year story,
Yeah,
when
I'd
you're,
say there's probably three significant turning points. Number one is when a national chain asked us to recycle their mannequins, not just in the regional area, but nationally.
okay,
And I didn't want to say no, even though we didn't have the capacity to do that. But
yeah,
then I realized, why not partner with my competitors? A competitor doesn't always have to be someone that you don't work with. I figured this was to our advantage where I could be like the broker. So I
mm,
would call a used mannequin vendor in Minneapolis to pick up the mannequins at the Gap store there. They would then keep the mannequins, sell them to their local customers. They would pay me a brokerage fee. That allowed me to expand and say, yes, I'm a one-stop shop for anyone to call me if they are recycling mannequins nationally. Because you have to make it easy for the stores.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're not going to do it. So they're not going to call a different used company in other states.
How early was this? How early?
Oh, that was in 2010.
Okay.
2010.
It was a Gap, you said?
It was BB, and I don't even know if they're in business anymore, but it was BB that did that. But I had worked with the Gap before, but usually just regional. But now I realized, hey, I can take this nationally. So that was a big bump up, put it this way. I guess the first bump up was going from renting to selling, because I had no idea how to price these items too. I was just going to do it renting. All of a sudden, wow, I've got all these different types of mannequins to price, whether it's, like I said, a leg or a hand or a different kind of mannequin. So learning to price it and just learning e-commerce and learning about shipping. You know, I like mannequins, not how to be a warehouse manager and ship items out of there. As anyone knows who starts a business, you have to learn to be an expert in a lot of different areas, even ones that you don't have any interest in at all. And particularly in my age group, you know, learning technology was also a thing. Fortunately, I like technology. My dad's an electrical engineer, so I was kind of always comfortable with it. But I know I talked to other people in my age group, and once again, I'm 65. You know, they don't feel as comfortable using technology as I did. Without technology, my business would not have grown. You know, whether it's just having the e-commerce presence or adapting to social media or just finding other ways to kind of automate things to make it a lot faster. I think another challenge is this business. My husband and I started the business, but he was a good support. As the business became more successful, it started creating some stressors in the marriage, and we're now divorced. And at first I didn't know, was I going to be able to run the business without his support? Well, it turned out it did even better without his support, but that's a different story in itself.
Yeah. Maybe I can ask you to just talk a little bit more about that, because I think a lot of people, especially if they sort of start something as a hobby, turns into a business, if they're married, well, first off, it kind of takes over your life. So whether or not the spouse is involved, and sometimes they even formalize it. I've heard a number. I mean, this wasn't your case, but I've heard a number of stories of people that, I'm trying to think offhand, but ran a business, got divorced, but then remained business partners with some level of success, which I can't imagine, right? I mean,
I couldn't have done that.
Yeah, but just tell me a little bit more about that, if you could, the whole dynamic. And I don't want to push all the pain points of your life. But,
I know, that's okay. Yeah, we have a good relationship. I mean, he was the first person who really believed in me about, you know, you could make this mannequin business work when almost everybody else thought I was crazy. So I think I have some degree of loyalty, just that he was just such a big champion for me. I think neither one of us expected for the business to take off so much of our life. But at the time, he had been working full time and was just kind of helping out. When he lost his job, he then didn't want to go look for another job and wanted to be involved with the business full time. And that just can be really challenging. I think particularly when the woman runs the business, I think it's really hard many times for a man to take orders from the wife. And we didn't always have really clear boundaries about who did what kind of thing. If he was just handling the technology and I was handling, I don't know, the warehouse, for example, or vice versa, it might have been different. It was too blurry. And I don't think that was the only reason, but that just kind of like made it worse for other issues that were in the relationship. That was just kind of like, one more thing.
And what was the
when
time?
It's good, I was gonna say, when it's good, it's nothing better, but when it's bad, there's nothing worse.
Yeah. What was the timeline on that? Was that like early on, or has that been a long stretch of the whole thing? And
we got divorced in 2014.
Okay.
So we started with, the nice little run. You know, I figured I started the business in 2001. Nice little run. Even the last couple of years before I got divorced were rocky, but you're just trying to like hang in there because you're supposed to. And I'm a pretty tenacious person, and my parents have been married 65 years. I just thought, divorce is not something that you do, is what I thought. But that's old technology. Sometimes you have to reboot.
I got it. You have kids?
Huh?
Do you have kids?
No children.
Okay, so obviously no children involved in the business.
Yeah, that made it a little bit easier. We joke, our mannequins are our kids.
So, can you remember the points at which you did things like form an actual LLC, other legal work, just some of the, administrative things, trademarks, but also, in other words, a lot of people, when they start something on the side, they put that off, and then they realize a year into it, oh, that's right, I probably gotta have some information and my trademarks. So I'm just and
we're an S corporation. So early on when I realized that, wow, the internet was going to allow us to reach customers outside of the Bay Area, I knew I needed to get the name trademarked. Because initially I just thought, oh, this is just going to be a local business right here. The
Yeah.
very week our website went up, I got an email from someone from another country who was coming to the Bay Area for a trade show and wanted to rent a mannequin. And that's when I realized, wow, this internet is really something here. Once again, we're talking 2001, if anyone can remember that. It felt like the internet was still so new.
Yep.
But then I've always been someone who goes to a lot of workshops and roles in business incubators, accelerator programs, because I knew nothing about business. My background was in sales and marketing and journalism. I knew business was a whole different area. And so many times I would go to seminars and they were the ones who would say, you need to do this or that for your business. So it was like a steep climb, I guess you'd say, where
Yeah.
it's like, wow, all of a sudden I went from 0 to 100, become an S corporation or start, hiring employees instead of working with just independent contractors when, you realize that, hey, this person is not an independent contractor, they're an employee. You may want to not have employees because that brings up a whole other, ball of wax, but, you need to have it. So, and then I've always had good people around me, initially independent contractors, but when I started, hiring people, I had people who brought another level of expertise. Everyone talks about diversity, and diversity is not just, race or age, but points of view. And I've always been open to having people with different points of view because I know I'm like a big picture, just go and do it. And I need someone who has more strategic plans in mind. Like, okay, let's do this before we do that. Or we need to kind of go through these kind of steps. And I realize, even though I don't always like to hear that, because, we want to do what we want to do, I realize it's important to have that kind of balance.
Got it. How many employees do you have now?
I have 3 employees, but I have 8 independent contractors.
Okay. And is that the most you've had? Because I know you said during COVID you had to shut down and whatnot. I'm wondering if
that's the most I've had. After COVID, we just kind of went back up to our same level. Just one of our employees moved out of state, and so she couldn't be considered an employee anymore, but she's still part of our team.
I see. Okay. And
COVID was a killer.
Yeah. Tell me more about what happened to you. You said you were shut down.
It was just a little bit of everything. I mean,
was
looking
everything
back
shut down?
now.
I mean, was everything shut down? Because I'm wondering if you had to shut everything down. In other words, I know your office and your storefront maybe had to shut down, but if most of your business is e-commerce.
That's what helped us. The online part really helped. That kept going. But sometimes people were ordering something online that was only in our Oakland location. So that means we had to kind of come in here and sneak to be able to ship the item out. But, we used to get a lot of foot traffic into our business, and we make the biggest profit on the items that we have in our store because these are the used items. So the items online or go through drop shippers, our margins are smaller. So we want to have like a nice mix. But, during COVID, pretty much all the local business was shut out between having to shut down during COVID. In California, we also had a lot of fires that kind of like added to it. The whole Black Lives Matter was a big issue here in Oakland. People aren't going to be shopping for mannequins in the midst of the Black Lives Matter thing. And then we had a lot of people.
It's just kind of funny.
And we had a lot of people leaving the state. A lot of people were leaving California because they could work remotely for cheaper. So that also impacted the number of new stores that were opening here or stores that were closing down. So it was a tough one for us. But, they always say pressure makes you turn into a diamond or else go under. We implemented some new things that we're thriving off now.
Okay. You want to talk about what some of those are?
Sure.
So, look at stuff right then. I'd love to hear what they are.
Okay. Well, one of the things is we realized that the whole DIY movement got really big during COVID. Yeah. So we started really offering more tutorials that people could buy to show unique things you could use as a mannequin, as a canvas. Okay. And one of the big ones is a dress form Christmas tree, which we're going to be having a contest on this December. But another thing is, once people could start meeting in person, is we had a bunch of mannequin heads that we got used from a store. And then we have a lot of flowers that we got from the Macy's Flower Show. I don't know if I can show you something. And so people then can now take a mannequin head and make a flower crown headdress. This is just one that's in process right here.
Oh, okay.
And we started having classes where people could come in and make their own flower crown headdress or a zip tie headdress using a mannequin head. And what we realized has got really popular, Bill, is people are wanting to do it as a team building organization, a team building activity. Particularly companies that are now working remotely, it's what's something they can do that's inclusive, that's creative, that's a group activity, but yet nevertheless is still individual activity. Yep. We've been getting more requests for team building. Before, people would come in for like a bachelorette party, or maybe they were going to a music concert or they wanted to make something. But making something by hand has become such a self-care kind of thing. So between the self-care and the team building, I mean, we kind of started it before COVID happened, and then we had to stop it, and now it's coming back bigger than ever.
That's a very interesting thing. I never would have thought of, but that
Me
makes a lot.
either. Me either. You know, when you're an entrepreneur, you just got to always continue just kind of like hustling and dancing. I mean, it just came
Yeah,
out of the fact that we had heads and we had flowers. What do we do? Well, we just used to make some headdresses as decoration, but people
yep,
started asking to buy them. So people were doing that paint and sip. You know, that paint and sip is really popular. This is
yeah.
our version of a paint and sip.
I
Instead of
see.
art for your wall, you wear art for your head.
That's awfully interesting. Okay, okay. And
But
so,
it's only local, so that kind of limits it in some
yeah, I
level.
was gonna say, so physically come in there to your store in
Yeah.
Oakland. And do it.
Or companies hire us to come on site.
Oh, that makes sense too. Of course, sure. Do you want to talk a bit about the financial success? Where you're at.
Yeah, that's always a little personal, but
Yeah.
let's just say we've always been knocking on that $1 million door.
Okay.
That has been my goal, is to be $1 million business, because so few women own and so few women of color own businesses get to that threshold. We're
Hmm.
always like around 8-ish, 9-ish, close enough to see it's in range, but then not quite there. And then
Yeah.
COVID just completely knocked us out. I feel if not this year, we'll be there next year with these new initiatives that we're putting into place. I will. And also, I realized I had to get a lot tighter on some of my bookkeeping and record keeping. Once again, as a creative person, that really wasn't a strong suit. I realized there were some things that I was carrying that were just a drain in terms of they really weren't bringing in the returns. It was taking too much time and effort to work with it, but we weren't getting enough of a return.
Yeah.
So part of it is not just as what comes in, but what do you do with what comes in? How
Of
it's
course.
being managed.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, that's fair. And
You know,
so,
for a little niche business like ours, we're proud of that. I mean, and
no,
I
I
think
mean,
it's just
good
a
for you.
lifestyle business, Bill. I only work in the office 3 days a week here, where it's
Okay.
open to the public. I do some work at home, but this is not something I want to consume my entire life. You said,
Yeah.
I'm in my 60s. I don't want to be retired, but I want to work out this as a grind. I'm
I hear
also an Airbnb host, so I have other, once again, multiple streams of revenue
you
to make
go.
it in.
Yeah. Good for you. And yeah. So tell me. I mean, I feel like there's a million questions I could ask on this. It's funny. I'm 51 now, so when you say, "Oh, I was in my 40s," I'm like, "That's not old," but I know the state of the world and what some 22-year-old watching those things.
Yeah,
But
you feel
I'm just thinking
ancient, yes.
yeah, I'm thinking about what are the challenges, what worked in your favor, but also what worked against you. Both starting this in your 40s, but now at 65, running it. I'm trying to think what you
Well,
know.
first of all, when I first started, I could just forget about getting any kind of investment capital. I mean,
Yeah,
given the first that I'm in a new business that no one's really ever heard of, I'm a
yeah,
woman of color. I didn't even think about trying to go to the bank to try to get any kind of investment capital. And particularly
right.
here, I know the Bay Area is kind of unique. Most investment capital goes to businesses that can scale up that are in technology. So the fact that access to capital was just not an option for me was obviously a challenge. It
Okay.
certainly helped that a lot of my inventory I was getting for little of nothing because I was doing the free recycling. I think
Yeah,
right now there's never been a better time to be a small business owner, and particularly a woman of color business owner, because for once there's much more attention about the disparity that's existed. There are more grants and programs available. I've always applied for grants. Applying for grants has been a big part of how I felt I could get quote unquote venture capital, was
okay.
grants. And I've won almost every year I win a grant or two.
Now,
Anything
what
from
kind of grants? Tell me, like, are these contests or these specific?
they're contest grants, but many times they're skill based in terms of you have to write about what your business opportunity is. I've won everything from round trip tickets on British Airways because I was talking about how a face to face contact with my connection overseas would make a difference. I've won $100,000 technology grant from Intel when we were going to put RFID tags on all of our inventory. I won a $10,000 grant from Comcast. I mean, almost every year I apply for something. And
Yeah,
sometimes it's collateral, sometimes it's cash, and sometimes it's recognition. When I won an award from the Environmental Protection Agency, there was no money involved, but it allowed me to say the credibility of like, wow, this company recycles so many mannequins a year, the EPA has recognized their efforts. So that then gives me credibility into a whole lot of areas. So I'm a big believer in entering, and I'm talking about the kind of contests or grants that like an RFP and require a whole lot of documentation. More like business grants that are becoming much more popular now that we've seen what a difference small businesses make. I think for the past, until COVID, I think bigger businesses got all the attention. We didn't realize how small businesses are such the lifeblood of communities, both in terms of the resources we provide in the neighborhood, the people that we employ. Everyone that I employ is from a marginalized community. They're either over a certain age, they're a person of color, or the LBGTQ. I keep all the, excuse me for getting all the alphabets messed up. And I have one person who has a minor disability. Now, I wasn't actively looking toward that, but I think small businesses are trying to be a little bit more understanding, a little bit more receptive to that. It's more of a personal relationship. So I think because the one positive thing out of COVID, we really saw the difference that small businesses make, and more companies are offering opportunities for small businesses to get funding.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, yeah. So we start. I'm glad you took that detour because that's really fascinating to me. But I do want to kind of just drill a little more on what were the advantages and what were the disadvantages to start. I think I mentioned before we went live here. Pardon me, before we went live, that there are a lot of studies that say entrepreneurs that are a little bit older have a higher level of success. But what I've not found are studies on first-time entrepreneurs that are a little bit older. It's one thing to say, yeah, it's my 7th business. I know what I'm doing, right?
Right.
And this was really your first. This was
Yes.
really, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, what advantages do you think you had, and what disadvantages did you have, especially if you think back to that, first couple of years of running this?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the advantages that I had was that I had a strong sense of self. Because
Yeah.
everybody looks at me and says, "You do what for a living?" I think if I was younger, I might not have been able to handle that type of quest. Because
Yeah.
when you're younger, you usually want more outside validation with everyone else. That's why I worked for Johnson and Johnson, United Airlines, big name companies everybody knew about. Particularly when I started, having your own business wasn't nearly as sexy as it is nowadays. So I think if I'd been younger, I would not have been able to deal with the onslaught of, "You sell mannequins for a living? How do you do that?" Da, 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 da. Now I find it fascinating. But I mean, because I was older, I felt good about that. Secondly, being older just gave me, like I said, I was always a pretty tenacious person, but this really gave me much more drive and determination. And because I liked what I was doing, I found I was energized. It wasn't like, oh, because I'm older, I don't have the same energy. When you love it, and yeah, my Tina Turner, the girl that I was looking for the tickets for, she feels like she's ageless because she loves what she's doing. I felt older when I was at a job that I hated, that I'm now doing something I love to do. And I think the only disadvantage about my age is I think, if I had gone for investment, which wasn't an option, I don't think they would have felt, oh, I was a good risk. So once again, I didn't even try to go for that to begin with. But what I love is because most of my business wasn't internet based, no one knew what I looked like. For the longest, I did not have anything that said that I was a woman or a woman of color, even where I was located. And I felt like that gave me advantage. I could be ageless, nameless, sexless on the internet. People just want my product, not me. When I got a first big order from Prada in Italy, they didn't know I was selling mannequins out of my backyard in Oakland. They just saw, we like that mannequin. It's no longer being produced. How do we get it? So I'm a big proponent of the internet and making it possible for people to expand into areas that someone may not normally come. We get a lot of people who would never do business with a Black woman in Oakland. Let me just say that. Because I go back and look at some of my customers' Facebook pages sometimes, and I'm like appalled at what I see sometimes. But I'm like, you know what? It's just business.
Right. I guess the money's green, but yeah.
The money's green. The money's green. So I like that the internet. Only recently have I felt a little bit more comfortable saying I'm a woman of color, because that's kind of like the little buzzword that's out right now. And no one likes to feel like someone's giving you your business just because of your age or your race. Yeah. But since that is the thing that people are looking for now, they're actively trying to do business with people of color, then I put that out there. But for the first good 15 years, you have to really dig to see who was the owner of Mannequin Madness.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And interesting too, because you think of, I'm just doing the math here. If you're in your 40s when you started this in 2000, that means you had 15 to 20 years of business experience before the internet, right? Like, I mean, the internet existed, but before the consumer internet, certainly before the entrepreneurial internet.
Right.
And
before Instagram, before Facebook.
Oh yeah, before Craigslist, right? Which is where, I mean, and I think I'm a little bit younger than you, but I still have that sense of I worked as a newspaper reporter, and we didn't have email addresses. That was Buck Rogers, in the very first days when I was like the young novice reporter. But it is interesting to think like what tool, for example, you talked about I would pick up the phone and call and talk to the visual merchandisers at all these retail outlets. Well, you hear a lot now of younger people that are afraid or at least not attuned to use the phone. And I am on the other side. It's pretty rare that I'll pick up an unknown phone call and just say, sure, let's talk, because it's probably a robocall or scammer or something. But there is an element of I don't know, that sort of that tool that nobody thought was any big deal back then, but now it's like, of course I would walk in and say hello to you and talk to you and you know, and not
You
think that.
need a mix. You need a mix. Quite frankly, I think sometimes we've gone so far the other way where we, as you said, we've lost the ability to have dialogue or just to be able to, I know when I go to some events, another advantage of being older, I'm very comfortable making small talk with people that I don't know. I find that sometimes younger people have some real social anxiety around that. And I get that it's a thing, but I was like, social anxiety about going to a networking event and meeting people? I don't understand that.
Yeah.
But I think that's, once again, I came from a different era where that's all you did. That was the main means of communication. So
Mhm.
I think I had the advantage of also adapting to new technology. I think sometimes older people sometimes are slow to adapt technology. And I think sometimes younger people are slow to adapt some of the older things that have worked. How do you kind of have the middle way?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I mean, we've only just met, but you have confidence and charisma, which I expect you to have, but that goes a long way to begin with. But also, you seem to have a business that works, which which also gives people more
That
confidence.
helps. But it wasn't always this way. I think the biggest thing, I really was passionate about what I did. I said for the longest, I just thought I had a little hobby. And that was, I'm so glad I had a mind shift to really see it differently. Because when you hold yourself small, you
Yeah.
hold yourself small. When I
And what
started
was
really
the
thinking,
moment?
no,
That's a really. I'm talking over you, and I shouldn't do that. But
no,
what's the
that's okay.
moment? What's the moment? You said I had a mindset shift. I thought of it as a hobby, as a little
Yeah.
side thing, and then I realized, wait, this is a business.
Yeah, I had applied for a contest grant that Wells Fargo offered where they were acknowledging Black owned businesses who had, they called them some sort of a living legend, even though I felt too young at that time to be a legend. But you won $5,000 in cash. And it came down to me, who was a fairly new and still home based business, and to another person who had a much bigger traditional business. And I won. And they told me that why they went toward me is because they felt that I represented more of their customer base in that particular market. The more people had a home based, smaller business.
Okay.
Something about that validation I got from them, I thought, wow, if a bank recognizes me as being somebody that they want to give an award to, I need to start looking at myself a little bit differently. So I hate to say it, but I needed that outside validation
Yeah.
first to then start changing my mindset about how I saw myself. And soon after that is when we also had to move out of our facility. So it kind of like happened all together. I had to move out of the home
Yeah.
into a facility at the same time that I got this award. So I said, maybe this really is a business. And then
When
once I
was
had
all
a warehouse,
What
I
year
had,
was all that? What year was all
uh,
that, if you
I
remember?
believe that was like 2004.
Okay. Okay. So a
Yeah,
couple years.
2004. So I definitely was still doing it, for several years without, still feeling like it's a hobby. But something about when I moved it out of my home, and I know some people have a very successful business in their home, but I
Yeah.
needed to be outside of my home. First of all, to create that separation. And then when people come to a warehouse, they still want to haggle, but when they come to your home, they really want to haggle. So it really changed like my customer base. And I
Yeah.
think people also felt more comfortable coming to a business. I mean, I have people that drive hours away from where we live. They drive from hours to come here. We've actually become a bit of a tourist destination, if you can believe that, because people who love mannequins love to come here and see everything that we have on display. They like that they can take it with them versus having it shipped. They save money on shipping. They like to, ask us questions about the different styles of things. Even I'm surprised how people can have a thing for mannequins, and I sell mannequins for a living. So, but being in a business just made it more comfortable for people.
Got it. Yeah, actually, that goes to the one question I had here that I haven't worked into this. It's what is it about mannequins? Explain this to me. I mean, I put calls out all the time, interesting entrepreneurs, and somebody mentioned you to me, and they said she's got the biggest recycled mannequin business in America, as I think. And I don't know if that's how you tout yourself,
Yes.
but I'm like, that's hilarious because it never would have occurred to me. But tell me, what is it that makes them funny or interesting? What's the thing about mannequins?
Well, mannequins go back to King Tut's tomb, right? It's the representation of the human figure. So it's just a part of that. It's a part of us. right? And so mannequins have been always been used as some form of either decoration or some sort of stand-in for a human form. So I think there's something that's sort of primal, for lack of a better word, about it. But I think as the internet has given people more examples to see about cool things that people do with mannequins, people who maybe wouldn't have thought about something, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'd like to do that. And now they have the accessibility. I mean, there was a time where only a department store could get a mannequin because they had to be ordering hundreds at a time. Now that a private individual can come in and just buy a mannequin head for a Halloween display, it makes it a lot easier. And I think I just came along at the right time where the rise in mannequins became more popular as more and more people started selling stuff online from their store, from their home, or on Poshmark and things like that. And they needed a mannequin because mannequins sell clothing much more than just having something on a hanger. So that helped, along with the idea that people are concerned about sustainability. And it's like, wow, if I can buy a used mannequin that's just as good a quality and it's cheaper, let me do that because I'm also helping the environment. And then you have people who, like I said, always want a mannequin or some sort of an art project. But I think there's something about, like I said, the human form in its idealized form, right? While we
Yeah.
do have some plus size mannequin, most mannequins are about somebody's fantasy, right? They have no cellulite, no wrinkles, perfect body.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
What we
I don't know
wish
if I
we
want
could
to know
be
the,
like.
I don't know if I want to know I do want to know the answer to this, but I don't know if I want to know the answer to this, which is, what's the strangest thing you've had somebody say, "Oh yeah, I want to buy a mannequin because I want to X."
The Burning Man crowd, I don't know if you're familiar with Burning Man, okay?
That
And
makes
they do
sense.
some pretty wild things.
Okay.
Another thing that's really popular and we kind of became a little reputation for is people like shibari, which is a form of Japanese rope tying, which is in the S&M community. So I started writing a lot of blog posts about using mannequins for shibari. Oh
Wow.
my God, that is like one of our most popular categories because I could look on my website and see where someone came to our website, and they usually have come from one of the articles or the YouTube posts that we have about mannequins as shibari. I want to show you that, say that's strange per se, but just the fact that most people think of mannequins as displaying
Yeah.
clothing, not as for something like that. For
Yeah.
a while, we got into the what do you want to say? The mannequins that people use for more personal uses. There's some mannequins that are anatomically correct and
Okay.
have body parts that can be substituted for human body parts. We tried to get into that for a little bit, but that was a little too far out of our comfort zone. And, we did that during COVID because people were many times looking for a companion. But we
Wow.
realized, that's a little bit outside of, even though it was still a mannequin, it was just a
Yeah.
different lane. So we stopped that. But I was willing to give something a shot for a minute. But I
Wow.
like the more PG ideas for a mannequin than the X-rated mannequins.
I got it. I got to compliment your ability to come up with euphemisms right there. That was pretty impressive.
But that was just a short time we did that. Now, another thing, Bill, I just want to tell you in terms of something that surprised me that people will rent a mannequin or a dress form for is that sometimes when brides are getting married, they'll rent a dress form to display their mother, their grandmother, and other family members' wedding gowns, either at the wedding or at the bridal shower. And I thought, well, that's not strange per se. I thought, wow, what a nice touch, because who doesn't like to see their wedding gown another time? And particularly if you can't fit into your mother's gown or you don't want to wear your mother's gown.
Yeah.
It's a way of honoring her or your grandmother at the wedding without putting on the gown. So
Yeah.
my customers find the most creative ways to use a mannequin. I'm just happen to be the vessel. I put myself out there. I have the different products that they could use, but they come with ideas. One lady made a mailbox. She made a mailbox out of a mannequin. The mailbox was coming out of the mannequin's stomach. I wouldn't have thought of that as an idea, but I thought when she finished it, I said, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Interesting.
It's
Well,
all over
Judy,
our Pinterest board.
the
It
whole
was all
thing.
over our Pinterest. I'm sorry,
Say
you
again?
first.
No,
It's
no,
all
no.
over my Pinterest board. That's why I have over 50,000 followers on Pinterest. I have
Yeah.
all these different creative ways that people use mannequins and
Got it.
categories. So there's a whole category on mannequins for mosaic or mannequins for tattoos and body art. That's another thing. Many times people want to practice their tattoo or body art. They don't need to have a expensive mannequin, but they want to at least have some sort of human form in which to practice on.
Interesting. Really interesting. Well, the whole thing's been interesting, Judy. Thank you so much for talking today. I'm Bill Murphy, understandably.com. And I hope we'll get a chance to talk again. All right. Thank you. All right. We're going to call that the end of it. I'll just trip it. I didn't bother to shut off recording because I think it'll automatically hang up on you. but I'll
Okay.
trim that down. But no, that was fantastic. I think for sure I can get what I need out of this. I think my guess is we'll do something for the understandably audience about um, a lot of what you talked about at the end about being a little bit older and just, and you'll see it's going to look like as if you had written an essay.
Okay.
But I'm going to take your own words. I'll change tenses as need be, but I'll move it around, and you'll see what I come up with before I run it. But everybody's
Okay.
really
Good.
like that, and
And,
assuming
and
editors
if,
support, which I think they surely will. I just like the notion of since you said almost a million, I think I can say because we think in headlines, but like from Craigslist ad to almost $1 million or something like that.
yeah.
Uh,
I mean, technically we're at 1 million, but it doesn't always show on our books.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not doing an audit here. I mean, and
Yeah.
actually, I didn't want to push too hard on it, but whether that's $1 million in revenue that you've hit, or you've already hit $1 million in revenue, and you're talking about $1 million in profit because you started
No,
talking.
revenue.
Yeah.
And two things, Bill, if there's anything that you need to have any kind of clarification on when you're
Sure.
writing up, let me know. And I like your questions, by the way. I like that.
Thank you.
And I didn't realize that you too have noticed that sometimes younger people have a hard time talking to people. It's something that seems so basic, right?
Yep.
But just the idea of picking up the phone and calling someone, you said that's all we had back then. So
Sure. Yeah.
it's interesting, Granted, email makes things a whole lot more convenient. I mean, all these other brokers that I've worked with across the country with doing the mannequins, I've never met any of them. We've only corresponded through email. So there's certainly some advantages there, but sometimes you do need to just talk to somebody.
Yeah. I mean, I write this newsletter every day. I've done it for coming up on 3 years, but I've only fairly recently started doing these video interviews. And the number of people that have emailed me after and say, you look nothing at all like I expected you. I mean, I have a little picture, but I didn't have the beard before or whatever. But
Okay.
actually, if you've been complimentary, said I look younger, they all thought I was much older. But, I guess that's a compliment.
Well, Bill, I promise you will always look at mannequins in a different way now because friends
I will for
always
sure.
send me pictures of mannequins. When they travel internationally, they're always sending me pictures of an unusual mannequin. And they say, when they think of mannequins, they think of me. So
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
All right. Thank you, Judi. This has been great. And I'll follow up with you. I probably will have a question or two. So
perfect. All right. Thank you.